And welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Bench with Bubba. Continuing our team previews for the 2023 fantasy baseball season. We head to the NL East to the Atlanta Braves, a juggernaut of a team in recent years. World Series a couple years ago, contending again last year. And when it comes to fantasy, just roster top to bottom has some kind of impact at some point in time, it feels like. So it's a great, great team to break down for the season. In order to do so, special guest of the show, friend of the show, gentleman I got the pleasure of meeting in Arizona in person, let alone had him pod many times and whatnot. Great guy. He has the wonderful podcast, the Toolshed Podcast with Eric Cross, writes Fantasy Pros. He's the lead dynasty analyst at pitcherlist.com. And he has this new venture that you guys have probably heard of. It's called Dynasty Dugout. It's absolutely outstanding. Guys, one of the hardest workers out there, especially in the dynasty game. Mr. Chris Clegg at RotoClegg on Twitter. How we doing, my friend?
I appreciate the awesome introduction, as always. It's good to chat with you. One of the best people in the industry. You're one of the first people that brought me on a pod, as a lot of people in this industry can say, which is, a lot of fun. But I bought my first microphone because of you when you invited me on Bench with Bubba. So I went to Best Buy and bought a Yeti, and kind of the rest is history, man. So it's been a fun ride over 3 years' time now, I guess. So started in 2020, right before the pandemic, and golly, it's been a heck of a ride, man.
Hey, it's amazing you made it through the pandemic. That's good. You persevered. You persevered. You picked I think you tweeted it or said it on a show or something. I don't know. I talk to you or see stuff from you all the time. You said I picked a heck of a time to be an analyst because you had COVID, and then you had like the different baseballs, like then you had the shortened season. Like you've had something every year to like be a roadblock basically to being an analyst, and you persevered, my friend, and it persevered into Dynasty Dugout. So the floor is yours. Let people know what you got going on in your Substack over there.
Sure. Yeah. So kind of launched my own thing on top of everything else that's going on in my world. But basically just looking for an outlet to do more dynasty stuff. So at the Dynasty Dugout, it's dynastydugout.substack.com. So it's a Substack. And I have a lot of free content, but also some paid content. So if you want to subscribe, it's free to subscribe. You'll get the daily emails of writing that I do. And then paid subscribers also get, my top prospects, top dynasty ranks, top FYPD rankings. I'm building a dynasty ADP system. I have 14 dynasty mock drafts that are kicking off tomorrow that will, or I guess today as you're probably listening to this, but we'll be creating a dynasty ADP system that'll be on there. Got a lot of cool features, like you can connect it with your Fantrax league to see like the best available players, like based on my rankings. It's kind of like RotoWire has, but you can utilize like my prospect and dynasty rankings, and you see that Fantrax upload sheets, like to upload your dynasty league, you name it. I just wanted to be like as personal as I could with this stuff, and we've got a cool Discord going on, so a lot of good dynasty chatter in there. So if you want to check that out, feel free to do so. Like I said, free to subscribe, but also a paid subscription as well. And I always appreciate any support. So appreciate all those that have subscribed so far.
Yeah, I highly recommend it for you dynasty players out there. Chris is one of the good ones, and he puts his time in, which is always worth supporting at another level if you're playing dynasty. So I definitely would check it out if you can. But we also have him on today because he is an Atlanta Braves fan. He follows the team very, very closely. If you've seen him on Twitter, he's tweeting out, I've got tickets available if I can't make it, or he's been to games. He's got great seats when he goes. So he knows this team inside and out, especially this young group that's there that's going to be signed for the next, it feels like 45 years because, they have a great GM in place in Anthopoulos. It's just amazing what the Braves have going on here. But we're going to go through hitters and pitchers like we usually do on these team previews. And we'll start at the top with Mr. Ronald Acuña Jr. As it's January 1st, he is the second in ADP, but he's gone as high as 1, as low as 4. He's in the conversation every time it's discussed at the position. Came back last year off the injury. Power was down a bit, but the steals were up, or at least more than most expected coming off the injury. The batting average was down a bit too, but there were some like positive things to take away as well. So heading into 2023, Chris, we're assuming he's healthy now. Are we thinking full go? Because like a few years ago, it's like this is a 40-40 dude. Are we back on like expecting the world from Ronald Acuña?
I think so. And I do think that there was definitely some timidness with him returning from that ACL injury. And it was really apparent with him in the field. Like he just wasn't moving around as well in right field. And I have partial season tickets. So I'm there a good bit. And my seats are right out there down the third baseline. So I get a pretty good view of him in the field. And he just wasn't aggressive at all. And I think there was just a lot of hesitancy for him to really just, because he got injured on a play in the field. So it's like he just had that hesitancy. There's a lot that really hinges with power with that push off leg. And I think being fully healthy, we should expect the power to come back. I mean, you would look and his contact rates were the best of his career last year. The stolen bases were quite a pleasant surprise. He had 29 and he came back late in the season. Not late, but he only played 119 games and still stole 29 coming off an ACL injury. That seems pretty significant. I think that there's easy 30 stolen base upside, especially when you think about the changed environment this year. So we have a totally different stolen base environment. 40 is not out of the realm of possibility. And I think the 30 home run power's back. So he's one of the few players in the game that I think could have that 40-40 upside. But 30-30 is also reasonable, and that's pretty darn good. So I think you'd be thrilled with that if you get it.
Yeah, no, we're back to the Ronald Acuña season. I think I took him in one draft recently instead of Trey Turner at the second pick, which was a big thing for me, for someone that's a big Trey Turner fan. But it's like eighth goes J-Ram, then Acuña for me at this point in time. And a lot of that's also because of the kind of outfield issues that many have talked about on many shows, that it drops off in a weird way compared to years past. So Ronald, a healthy Ronald Acuña, and it's kind of funny because it was before the injury, he was like most would consider the dead number one. Like he was the guy. And then he gets hurt, and everyone's kind of like, well, you got J-Ram, which is fine. You got Aaron Judge. Like there's argument, like people are starting to make more discussions. Like this guy was legit the guy everybody wanted at one, and now we're trying to find a reason not to take him at one. So I'm hoping he's back. I think he's back. I'm with you. I'll take the chance on him being back. Let's go to second base for another guy that we hope is back in to normal this year. It's Ozzie Albies, who missed most of last season with an injury. He looked off even before he got hurt. Things just weren't like he was kind of playing through it. It seemed like the way he was hitting the ball, like without the quality of contact we're used to with him, the power wasn't quite there. It just suffered all around, and then he missed the rest of the season. And he's supposed to be back and healthy this year, but this is a guy that seemed like he was starting to really get to peaking before he got hurt. Like he kept improving year after year after year, and now he took a step back. Are we in on Ozzie Albies maybe coming back to that Ozzie Albies form, or is there any concern from you?
Yeah, his price is pretty depressed too, which is nice. Like he's not going as one of the super high end second basemen. I know he's at the top, but there's kind of a variety of guys going in that range. But you're not having to pay a second round pick for him like you had in the past, and for good reasons. I mean, you mentioned the injuries, but also the fact that it was just a poor performance kind of all around. And I think a lot of that stemmed from a really high O swing chase rate. It was over 45%, which is just like danger zone. Like that's Javi Baez range, and you don't want that at all. I do wonder if in part, like especially early in the season when they didn't have Acuña, if he was pressing a bit, like trying to be the guy, because without Acuña in the lineup, he was trying to do too much. And I think that did lead to some chase. He's always been a higher chase rate guy. We've seen him high 30s, but he's made it work still. I don't think we should expect a good average from him, but we got to remember in 2021, 30 home run, 20 stolen base guy, 103 runs, 106 RBIs. Like that's an elite 4 category producer, and a 260 average isn't going to kill you. So my expectations aren't quite that high, but I do think that he rebounds in a strong way because there's other metrics that support that he had a improved season on the contact, like improved zone contact rate. It was up from 81.5% in 2021 to 86.3 last year. The overall contact rate was up. The biggest thing was he just hit the ball on the ground more, which is also something I kind of failed to mention with Acuña, but Acuña's ground ball rate spiked when he returned. And I think it's worth mentioning that with that injury, like the inability to lift the ball consistently is very notable. So no, I think I've got asked that question a couple of times, but no, I don't expect Acuña's ground ball rate because it went up to like 47%.
It jumped big time. Yeah.
I don't expect that to be the norm. And with Albies, like his jumped and was still 37%. The biggest difference that we saw with him is just, less line drives and fly balls. So naturally there's going to be more on the ground. His home run to fly ball rate was down. But again, this was an odd season for him where he was just banged up and then he missed significant time with like fluky injuries. The report came out yesterday that he has had no restrictions all offseason after he had the fractured pinky at the very end of the season. It's another fluky injury that kept him out. But I ultimately think that he's going to be fine. Personally, I wish he would just like stop switch hitting.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah. I mean, it's like the Cedric Mullins route. Like he's just not a good switch hitter. Like if he would just strictly become, a right-handed hitter, like he's a 328 career hitter from the right side.
Crushes lefties, man.
It's insane. And now we don't know what that would look like if he was, batting right against righties.
Yeah.
But he's still like a 250 career hitter from the right side. So I'd be interested to see like if he just stuck at the right side, like what he could do. I don't know if that's even in the plans or not, but I'm certainly back in on a bounce back here. I mean, just turned 26 years old earlier this month. So he hasn't even entered the peak of his career. I think this lineup's going to be back to its like fun old ways where they just enjoyed baseball and had a blast, like the World Series year, like we saw when they're, especially when they're all healthy. And so the pressure's off Albies, I think, this year. The expectations are a lot lower. So I think he's kind of primed to perform.
Yeah, he's got an ADP around 55 since January 1st, and DC's fourth second baseman off the board. So it is interesting. I'm with you. Like, at worst, you get a 2020 potential guy. Like, the biggest concern, I guess, I always have with Albies, I had it with Swanson also, it's where do they hit in that lineup? Because we know it does suffer a lot when they hit farther down. Like, roster resource has him hitting like sixth right now. Obviously, we'd love him a second behind Acuña and in front of the big dogs. And that could still change. Right now, they have Michael Harris second. We'll talk about him in a minute. There's a lot of moving parts that could take place there. Because that's happened in the past. We've seen like Albies and Swanson like flip-flopping all the time. And that can be something to keep an eye on as well. So I love Albies. I've always been team Albies. I've been looking at the buyback there. Him and a couple other guys at second base. So you can definitely look for a potential spike from, as you said. So I like the Albies call quite a bit. Let's go to third base. And this is a fun one because Austin Riley, he had that big 2021, hit 303, 33 homers. And I was like, oh, he can't do that again. Well, it's mainly the average. Sure. He still hit 273. Totally fine. Very, very good. And then he hit 38 home runs and improved on his walk rate and strikeout rate at the same time. So, like, after 2 seasons of seeing this from Austin Riley, I'm a believer. I'm like, this is a really, really good hitter. What's your thoughts on Austin Riley?
I think he just is who he is at this point. And I think people still haven't really fully bought in, which is nuts. But you mentioned between 2021 and 2022, I mean, we're looking at a 288 hitter, averaging 35 and a half home runs per season. It's pretty elite. Smokes baseballs, hits a ton of line drives. And that's kind of the recipe for success for a higher batting average. And you don't look at Riley and think of him as a high batting average player, but he's going to sustain higher BABIPs. Now, of course, he didn't sustain the 368 that he had in 321, but this past year, 315. And I think that you could probably see the BABIP even go up a bit. So probably pulled his batting average up a bit too, just because of the amount of line drives that he hits, how hard he hits the ball. I mean, absolutely just smokes baseballs all over the park. And he's going to get to plenty of power. He's 25 years old. I know that we keep talking about age on these guys, but they're all so young. Riley will be 26, like right around opening day. So prime of his career, I don't really see this going anywhere. Like, I don't see him declining at all because just looking at the profile and who he is, nothing suggests that there's regression coming. I mean, he even improved. The zone contact rate was 86% last year. That's really, really good numbers there. Across the board, Riley just checks all the boxes. And even though he doesn't provide any speed, I mean, he stole 2 bases last year, and that was the only time he stole in any of his career. That's okay, because with third base being a complete wasteland, like, you're going to be thrilled with the production you get from Riley. And I think this is just super sustainable. I mean, even last year improved his average exit velo by 2.5 miles an hour, career high near 16% barrel rate. I mean, there's a season in here where he hits 300 and has 40 home runs. So
the fun thing with Riley is the more I've dug into different players this offseason, like it's a flaw of, I think, many fantasy players. I know I was a flaw of mine for a while. I totally talked about how I've changed my approach a bit this year, but I've always thought, okay, early rounds, I got to have steals. But you look at guys like Pete Alonso, Yordan Alvarez, and Austin Riley, and everybody like loves Alonso and Yordan, but Riley kind of gets this like, well, I don't know, like treatment. But if you look at the improvements, like you said, Alonso's doing the same improvements for like 3 or 4 years now. It's just been a couple more years, but they are who you are. Like you're saying, these are power bats that hit for very good average, and it's because they hit the ball so hard. They hit a lot of line drives. They all do all the things you were saying. So the more I've looked in to Austin Riley, I'm seeing a lot of similarities in the Jordans and Pete Alonsos that I like to see in these types of hitters, and it makes me a lot more confident in the player that he should be year in and year out. That makes him worth the around 21st pick in drafts right now. Now the fun really begins. one of the most controversial Atlanta Braves in fantasy right now is Michael Harris II, because he had a monster debut, 114 games, went straight from Double A to the bigs. It's a Braves thing. 19 homers, 20 steals, 297 average. Like, nothing could go wrong for this guy. Played good defense, like just really, really good ball player. Slotted to hit second this year. He's got an ADP of like 27, so he's a second round draft pick in 15 teamers right now. You got to pay for him. The question I have for you, Chris, is he worth paying for in his – it'll be his first full season. 114 is pretty full. I'll give him credit for that. And he was the rookie of the year, so full enough. This will be his first starting out the gate season with the Atlanta Braves. Are we paying that price when there's guys like – well, I won't even mention – there's other guys behind him with similar profiles.
He's interesting, and I think that there is some regression coming, but I'm not sure it's going to be in the ways that people think. I think people think the power's a bit of fool's gold when you look at his overall profile, but when you look at like exit velo leaderboards, Michael Harris like stands out a lot. His 90th percentile EV in the majors last year was 108.3, which was like ahead of like Rafael Devers, Shohei Ohtani, like Matt Olson, like Bryce Harper, all these guys, you name it, like his 90th percentile exit velocity was above them. And in the minors, like this was no fluke either, because in the minors, his 90th percentile was 109.2. That would have put him in the club ahead of Mike Trout, Austin Riley, Julio Rodriguez, Pete Alonso. So the power is legit. Like he absolutely smokes baseballs. And you don't really think that when you just look at him. Like his profile doesn't really seem like that type. I think the power's definitely there. Like I'm seeing 25 home runs out of him. We know the speed is there. Like he's very efficient on the base pass. I think the biggest question for a lot of people is, is there going to be significant batting average regression? We saw a 24.3% strikeout rate, and he hit the ball on the ground a lot. So can he make those two things work? There's platoon risk. I think people see that as well. So some people are going to question, can he stick in the lineup against lefties? And it's a legitimate question, I think, when we really think about it. And that's something that's super important to think about at this draft price. You can't afford to draft a platoon player in the second round. He's at 27 overall. Like there's just no way you can do that. And so you have to really think about these potential options. Now, the positive thing is he plays Gold Glove center field. Yep. So I think that's going to keep him in the lineup consistently. And hopefully that'll be good enough to pretty much let him play every single day. And you go back and I've tried to examine, like, were there these split issues in the minors? And yeah, I mean, I'm seeing the same thing. Like he did have struggles against lefties in the minors as well. So could this be consistent? Maybe, but I do think there's room for improvement. We're looking at somebody that was kind of thrown in the fire, and he was 21 and absolutely dominated in ways that we couldn't have expected. Yeah. And when I go back, I went back to 2021, and the numbers are actually a lot better against left-handed pitching there, where he slashed 296, 369, 418. So that looks a lot better. Now, that was also when he was a high A, so something to think about. But when I look at Harris, I do see a player that improved throughout last season. We saw the ground ball rate, while it was really high, he did trend the right direction in August and early September. I kind of spiked a bit towards the end of the season, and he kind of went back to who he was. But I legit think that Michael Harris is a 2020 bat. I think there's more power than 20 home runs. But I also think that we probably, while he does make good contact, he's probably not a 297 hitter. I think we're looking at probably a 270 hitter. So whether you confront that at that draft price or not is up to you, whether the power speed outweighs that or not, and where he is in the lineup. He could hit second against righties, but against lefties, he's going to hit the bottom of the lineup.
Like maybe him and Albies switch spots, basically.
Yeah, right. And there's also a lot of depth throughout this lineup. So early season slump, he drops down, and these are all factors to weigh and consider. Yeah. I do think that Harris will be legit, but how legit, I guess, is the question.
That's the $1 million question. That's why it's like, okay, we know his talent's great. We saw it last year. If he did it for a whole 162, that'd be freaking amazing and be worth every bit of pick 27. There's no questioning that either. But it's like for me, like I'll throw some quick ones out there. And you don't have to go deep on them. Just like basically yes or no's. Would you rather take? This is where like the conundrum I come to. Would you rather have Michael Harris at his pick 27, or would you rather go with where does he go here? Randy Rosarena at 37.
Feel a little better about a Rosarena safety.
Well, that's part of my thing. Like it could, they're both the power speed combos. Maybe the average is a bit different, but safety, 100%. Then you also talk draft price. Like okay, so you have Harris at 27. You have Sed Mullins at 46.
I may probably go Harris there. The power I think will be pretty significant difference, but it'd be interesting.
And then last one, you have Harris at 27 or Adelise Garcia at 58.
That one's fun because I'm afraid he's just going to fall off the cliff, but he's been so good.
He's like back-to-back years, man, like a power speed machine.
It's hard to argue against because it's 2 straight years, but I'm like just looking at the underlying metrics, like he's going to fall off, but who knows when. So, man,
the price is great if he doesn't fall off.
Right. So at the price, like I probably would take Adelise there.
Yeah, that's why it's nothing against Harris, and people like kind of get all mad if you kind of downplay him. It's like the dude's super good. We're not saying he's not. It's just the risk reward factor. Like at that point in the draft at pick 27, you got guys going around him. You have Emmanuel Clase, Sandy Alcantara, DeGrom, Lindor, Strider, Hader, or like you have a bunch of dudes going around that what you're getting from them. Like you can almost write down right now within like a 5% on either side. This is what we're getting. Where Harris is just such a wide variance at that point in the draft. So what kind of risk are you going to take? But we won't make this the Michael Harris podcast. We'll move on. It's just such a polarizing name in fantasy right now for many good reasons. We'll go to the 5th Atlanta Brave that is getting drafted in the top 55 in the NFBC, which is just insane when you start penciling that together. And that is Matt Olson, who has an ADP around 45. First year in Atlanta last year, 34 bombs, hit 240, drove in 103. That's Matt Olson, folks. He had that monster year in 2021. It was an amazing year. But what you got last year was Matt Olson on a better baseball team, but this overall profile was the same as almost every other year. You've seen him. Still a better batting average than usual, but strikeout rate. That's who he is. There's nothing wrong with that. So what's your thought on Matt Olson?
I think he's honestly being a bit undervalued after last season. I think people were a bit disappointed because he hit 240 and only hit 34 home runs. But I would say you got what you paid for in pretty much every aspect, and you shouldn't expected him to hit 271 again. But in a vacuum, I do think that he's a fine pick, knowing the batting average risk. You're going to get everything else. You're going to get elite power. You're going to get the runs and RBI out of him. I mean, despite the downturn in batting average from 2021, I would still say his first season in Atlanta was very respectable, especially considering the shoes he had to step into. And Braves fans put a lot of pressure on him, more than he deserved. Freddie Freeman's shoes were big, and nobody wanted to be the guy to replace him. I mean, they traded for Olson, they signed him to a huge extension, and the fans' expectations were really high early in the season, and to the point where I think it got in his head a bit. Local Georgia boy too, so like a lot of pressure to perform. I think his second year, having Acuña back in that lineup, while the lineup was still deep, that just adds another factor to it. And I think that he's going to just kind of hit the ground running this year. And I think we're just going to see vintage Matt Olson, where he's pretty much a lock for 35 home runs, a ton of running RBI. And I think the average could fluctuate between 240 and 260, somewhere in that range.
Yeah, no, I have nothing against that at all. If you build your roster around it, he's a phenomenal play that you know what you're getting when you draft Matt Olson. So that's a beautiful thing as well. Let's head to the catcher, your new catcher, one Sean Murphy, who came over from the Oakland A's, most plate appearances by any catcher last season, well over 600. Now, how's that going to play with him as your starting catcher for fantasy, but also with Travis d'Arnaud in town, who's obviously not going to get, just benched either?
Yeah, I think people are kind of overplaying the fact that Murphy's just not going to get plate appearances. They wouldn't have traded for him and signed him if they weren't going to make him the everyday catcher. And we got to remember, Travis d'Arnaud has a long history of injuries. He's about to be 34 years old. I don't know how long his knees can really sustain being behind the plate. Now we've seen him be, very good. I mean, he's been a solid fantasy catcher from what we've gotten out of him the last few years. But again, 2021, he spent a ton of time hurt. He bounced back this year and had 426 plate appearances. But I think this benefits both of them in a big way, because when you look at the profiles, d'Arnaud is going to benefit from being in the DH role and catching a couple times a week. Murphy's durable enough to handle catching 5 times a week. And it's even important to remember that last year, Murphy DH'd a good bit with Oakland. I mean, he called 116 times, but he still DH'd 30 games. And I suspect that to be the case. Like, Atlanta doesn't really have a true DH in there. Like, Ozuna's bat sucks. I don't see him as being the TH option. So if Murphy's not catching, he's going to be in the lineup as a DH. So I still suspect that we get a ton of plate appearances out of Sean Murphy again. Does he eclipse 600? I don't know, because that's rare for a catcher.
Yeah, but that's tough for any catcher.
Yeah, but give me 550 out of him all day.
Yep.
And the power's going to play significantly better than it did in the Coliseum. I mean, Oakland is a terrible place to hit. And he's actually got a supporting cast around him. I mean,
on base for him too.
Who knew this could happen? But I think Murphy could be in for a career year, and I think we saw that in a way last year. It was his career best year, but I think the average ticks up. I mean, the numbers just don't really back a 250 hitter when you're looking at a 78% contact and a 85% Z contact. I just see a hitter that gives me a better average than this, especially when he's 20+% line drive, healthy, home run the fly ball. I don't know. I think 22. I think he could approach 25 home runs with a 260 average, which
be really
in
good.
that lineup, pretty enticing.
Yeah, that would play very, very well. Yeah, he's been a conundrum for me, so it's good to hear kind of a Braves perspective on that situation, because I've always, you said one of the best points, many good ones, but they traded for him for a reason, and they extended him for a reason. They're not going to platoon him, whichever they're not. So that's a very, very, very valid point to make in that scenario.
Yeah, that narrative should just go away.
Yeah, that's a good one. That crappy bat you talked about, though, Marcell Ozuna, he is supposed to be back in action to start the season, and it's a weird one with him. His ADP is 333. I've had a lot of drafts where it gets to that point in the draft, I'm looking at him going, this dude wasn't that far removed from like a 25-plus home run dude. Like, he always had power. The average was shaky from time to time. He's just a dummy, but I'm not going to get into that issue. But the dude can hit when he could hit. Now the question is, can he hit? What's your thoughts on Ozuna coming into the season? Because for now, he's going to be starting for the Braves.
Well, I mean, he almost has to, because they're paying him. I mean, his contract definitely warrants playing, and unfortunately, they're not going to be able to salary dump him to anybody. I think they tried it at the deadline last year. Just wasn't happening. I'd be shocked if anybody takes on. I mean, he's got 2 more years at 16.3 mil each.
Ooh, no.
When he's coming off the 2 seasons that he's had, not likely. But then you look back at the 2020 season, and while it was shortened, I mean, the dude did hit 338 with 18 home runs in 267 plate appearances. I don't know. I'm like, it's weird, because a part of me thinks that, like, he's just not really wanted in the clubhouse. He's just kind of forced to be there.
Yeah.
Maybe an offseason of mending can kind of help this. But again, we're looking at 2 straight seasons of him doing stupid stuff, and there's not any way to kind of go around that.
Nope.
The power was there. He hit 23 bombs last year. So as a late round power flyer, then there's a chance. I mean, he plays a terrible left field, but he's going to get reps out there. The Braves have signed a ton of guys to minor league deals that have a chance to make the roster in left field, but I just don't really see anybody but him or Eddie Rosario bearing a surprise trade. So you're probably right. Ozuna's going to get reps in left, and he's going to get reps at DH. So what can we expect? Hopefully better than last year. I mean, even if he just bumps closer to a 240 average, as late as he's going, there's power. And gosh, he was staring me down in the face at like 415 at DC the other day, and I just didn't do it. I was like, why? I should have, but that late.
That's what I'm saying. Like, his ADP is 330, 340, but he falls in a lot of drafts. And I've done it so many times, and I'll go around, and he's there again in the next round. I'm like, dude, like, because I know in the back of my head, I wouldn't be shocked if somehow he hits 30 home runs. Just because that's like, this talent's there. Because he said he had 23 last year. If somehow that average increases a bit, like, 30 might be crazy, but it's not insane. Let's put it that way. Like it's doable. And then you mentioned that offense. If he starts doing that in that offense, like goodness gracious, what he could do. At the same time, the dude could fall off the map and be platooning with God knows who. And that could be a whole other situation. But again, you're not paying the price for him anymore, which is interesting. You mentioned another name there in Eddie Rosario. Let's jump to him real quick. He's going to like 470, almost 480. And with him, it's interesting because he used to be like a perennial power speed dude. It's kind of been a weird injury riddled / platoon situation in recent years. But you mentioned like the Braves signed a lot of minor league guys to play the outfield. Right now, they're minor league guys unless spring training changes things. So Rosario's kind of got a role for now. So how do you look at him entering the season?
Yeah, I think you're right. I don't see Sam Hilliard beating him out. I don't see Jordan Luplow beating him out. All these guys that I forgot, they picked up somebody else random the other day that is going to get a spring training invite. Oh, they've got Kevin Pillar. They've got Eli White. Like all these guys, like these just guys that never made it really. I just don't see it. I mean,
No.
it's strangely enough, Eddie's still a fan favorite because of the World Series run.
Oh, that was an amazing run, man.
I mean, he was so elite during that playoff run, and I think that kind of bolstered the expectations a little too high. But also, it's important to remember that he started last year and he was like literally blind. Like
Yep.
he missed a significant chunk of time because he had to have eye surgery because he couldn't see for the first like month of the season. Like, why were you out there anyway? It was weird, but he came back and he still didn't produce afterwards. But it's pretty evident. Like you look at the numbers and you're like, yeah, I can see that he couldn't see. I mean, the contact rate dropped from 82.2% in 2021 to 70.6% last year. And he's been consistently around 80%. So maybe that ticks back up. I mean, the zone contact was down as well. I'm hopeful that he does have a bit of a rebound, and there's some intriguing speed. There's not a lot of power in the profile, but he's somewhat intriguing from a power speed late round guy. And I mean, even if he just gives us a 260 average, which is what we saw the previous 2 seasons before, and he's a career 270 hitter. So I think a bounce back possibility is there. I'm not fully counting on it. I wish the Braves would go out and trade for a top left fielder, but I don't think they have the pieces to do so. So the last 2 guys we talked about are going to get regular reps, I think, and we're going to get 400 plus plate appearances out of Eddie Rosario and Marcell Ozuna.
Yep.
So just in that, I think there's value.
Especially in DCs. Like that's huge value, especially where they're going, where there's a bunch of random guys at that point in time. You're really taking gambles on. These guys are going to get to play. And that's very vital. The last hitter I have down here, unless you have more after this, is Vaughn Grissom. And it's a really interesting kind of roller coaster we've been on with Vaughn Grissom because he had the monster minor league season, gets the promotion with all the injuries to Albies and company, played really well, really, really well. Then all of a sudden, it felt like a weird platoon started, like out of nowhere, but maybe I wasn't paying close enough attention to the Braves situation. It just kind of happened. And that leads into this season where, be like early September, like, oh, Vaughn's the guy who's penciled in, he's gonna play shortstop, but Swanson's gone, blah, blah, blah. And now there's kind of like concerns that he might not be the full-time guy still. So how do you approach Vaughn Grissom heading into the drafts right now as he's got a wonderful ADP of 182?
He's interesting. And I'll say this. I think the narrative is that Vaughn Grissom is terrible at shortstop. And that's absolutely not the case. I've watched him coming through the minor leagues, and to say he's a horrible shortstop is a horrible take. He may not ever win a gold glove, but I think there's still can be a solid shortstop without winning gold gloves. And we don't need Vaughn Grissom to be a gold glove caliber shortstop there. So my thing is, if the Braves did not trust him to be the everyday shortstop, they would have just re-signed Dansby, or they would have gone after somebody else via trade. But Ron Washington is probably the best infield coach in all of baseball, and he's consistently vouched for Vaughn Grissom all offseason, and he's worked with him all offseason. Literally yesterday, here's what he said about him. He said that Vaughn Grissom, it's shown exciting growth all season. He said, I see things I didn't see earlier. He's got aptitude. He really, really wants it, and he's been putting in the time to deserve it. So I don't think Vaughn Grissom would be supported by Washington and the Braves in this way if that were not the case. He's going to be the shortstop. He's going to be a solid shortstop. And honestly, I think it's crazy to say otherwise. So the good thing is that if the glove plays, then the bat's going to play because Vaughn Grissom is a really good contact hitter that has sneaky power and speed. I'm not sure the expectations to be that he's a 2020 bat, but we look at the contact numbers. He had a 90% zone contact in his debut. This is exactly who he was his entire minor league career, which is certainly exciting because he stepped right into the majors and continued that. The power numbers, well, he's probably never going to be an elite source of power. Not really need him to be because he's going to put so many balls into play. He doesn't strike out often at all. I mean, we're talking about 12% walk or strikeout to 8% walk rate in the minors last year, which is pretty darn impressive. And then it's important to remember he had less than 100 plate appearances in Double A before he made that jump to the majors last year and performed. Yes, there's questions of why he was platoon. Like, why did he not play every day on the stretch? And I still have some questions about that myself, but Orlando Arcia was swinging a bit of a hot bat.
True.
So he slotted in at second some, but it was just a weird hot stretch from Arcia, and that's not really who he was. So Grissom probably steps right in and is fine. Like, I look in the projections are kind of all over the board with him. They're not sure what to make of him, which is understandable. But I think there's definitely 15 home run pop in the bat, and there's certainly 20 stolen base upside. Very efficient on the base pass and a good runner. And with the contact numbers that he puts up and the heavy amount of line drives that he hits, I wouldn't be surprised if we see a 275 average or better out of him. And the projection systems also see that, which is kind of aggressive for someone who just turned 22 and barely had time in the majors. So I'm going to try to kill the narrative that Grissom's a terrible defender. And if you won't, go check out RM Layton. Had a great thread about him. RM Layton 8 on Twitter. He put a thread of a ton of plays that at shortstop. Like, he put in like watching like all day Grissom's glove, and I'm telling you, I've seen him live too many times, and I'm telling you, he's not a bad fielder. So,
all right, for fun, Mr. Braves, would you rather take the chance on Ozzie Albies coming back or wait on Vaughn Grissom because they're both second base eligible?
I might take a chance on Grissom later. I mean, that's
it's an interesting profile,
right? I mean, it's just the potential return on investment is just so much higher with Grissom than Albies at the price. So.
And you wouldn't be shocked if they finished with similar stat lines if Grissom played the whole season.
No, I mean, I think Albies gets to more power, but overall, I mean, very similar. Good return, similar. Yeah,
pretty close. All right. Any other hitters that I'm not thinking of, or have we pretty much covered all those guys for it?
Yeah, unless you want to talk about Arcia or Sam Hilliard, I'm good.
Those are guys I pick up in deep leagues when I'm desperate. Let's go to the pitchers here. And again, like the hitters, this is why they win World Series and contend. Loaded. Let's start with my boy Max Fried. Absolutely love Max Fried. Thing is, most people are starting to love Max Fried because he's got an ADP around 70 now. But the dude just eats innings, which allows him to accumulate strikeouts. And more importantly, the ratios are great. Everyone goes, oh, he's too much of a fly ball pitcher. It's called limiting contact, like quality contact, folks. This is what Max Fried does. Like, I had to make this argument last year. People are kind of believing it a little more now because he's done it for like 3 straight seasons. It's like, oh, maybe this is who he is. What's your thoughts on Max Fried? Because I think he's awesome. I think he's worth the pick. I have no problem him, even if you wait on pitching to be your ace, but definitely an SP2. I love Max Fried.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure what narrative you could make against him at this point. I mean, the last 3 seasons, we're looking at 2.68 ERA. Over 3 seasons.
Pretty good.
I get it. The strikeout numbers aren't great, but you're not drafting him as an ace. Where he's going, he's not an SP1. So I can live with the 23% strikeout rate in that range. You're right. He's an elite soft contact producer. I mean, that's what he does. And fly balls, whatever. I mean, he generates pop-ups, not like heavy fly balls to right and left field. So with Fried, I think we just kind of know who he is at this point. Now, should we expect another sub 2.5 ERA? Probably not, but you don't need him to where you're drafting him. And we're talking about the runner-up Cy Young. So really good season out of Fried. We saw a career high in innings, and I don't see any reason we shouldn't expect 185 to 195 this year. Usually we can see pitchers take a 10 to 15 inning step forward. He walked 4.4% of batters last year. His walk rate has improved by over 2% each of the last 2 years. So he was at 8.5% in 2020. Small sample, so you can say what you want to about it, but still 8.5 to 6.1 to 4.4. You love to see that.
Yep.
I don't really have much of an argument to make about Fried other than I just think he's really good. You can expect a low 3 ERA out of him, enough strikeouts to be serviceable, low walks, low whip across the board. He's going to get a lot of wins. I mean, 14 each of the last 2 years. That's a stat. The Braves win a lot of games, so that's valuable.
Yep, he's a stud, absolute stud. Another guy that's a stud who is getting drafted like an ace around pick 30 right now, and you're either Team Strider or you're not Team Strider. It feels like that is Spencer Strider, who had the rookie years of rookie years. And honestly, nothing against Michael Harris. I was kind of shocked Spencer did not win the Rookie of the Year because you have a sub-3, almost a 2.5 ERA, closer to 2.5 than sub-3. Strikeouts everywhere. Started in the bullpen, finished on the just the repertoire is amazing. The arguments, he's only got 2 pitches. Too bad. What's your thoughts on Spencer Strider? Like the talent's unbelievable. But there's arguments about, I guess, I don't know if longevity, but innings pitch, 2 pitch mixes. Is he quality starter ace material for that?
Yeah, I mean, he's certainly presents some interesting risk, but you can't really deny the upside. I mean, he is one of 2 pitchers in history to strike out 200 batters in less than 150 innings. So the only one to do it in less than 140. So the 2 pitchers that have done it in less than 150 were him and Chris Sale. Sale did it in 147 innings, and Strider did it in 131. That's just insane to think about. The only pitcher in history to strike out 200 while allowing less than 100 hits. The numbers are absolutely insane. I guess people want to question if a 2-pitch guy can be sustainable, but when you have 2 pitches that are as elite as Spencer Strider's, you can get away with it all day long. Now, the interesting thing is his changeup's pretty darn good too. He just doesn't throw it. If he could just throw it 10% of the time, I'd be okay. Just throw it exclusively more to left-handed batters, and I'll be fine with that. Run it away from those lefties and let's do the thing. But even if he doesn't, I don't care. I mean, we're talking about 98 to 100 every time at the top of the zone. Hitters can't catch up. The slider is just downright filthy. He can be fine with 2 pitches. So I guess the other question is like the oblique injury. He had an oblique.
That's a good one too, yeah.
So you have to question, like, what does that look like? And I want to say it's probably Derek Rhodes.
Derek Rhodes came out like a week or so or something on that, yeah.
Yes, that's what I was thinking. He had posted something about it, and he said he found that there was not a common recurring theme in obliques with pitchers, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
I do want to find the
that's what it was. It was something like more often than not, I think it was like 1 in 3 or even less was like a reoccurrence. Like once they're healthy, and it's not like a power hitter that keeps tweaking it type thing.
Yeah, so I'm not particularly worried about that. And if you're worried about his playoff start against the Phillies, he was hurt. Like it was pretty clear hurt because the velo was down. Like that pitch that he allowed that monster home run off of was 93. There was clearly something not right with him. And the oblique injury. So I don't know. I'm not sure I can get myself to draft Strider there, but I mean, if he even let's say he regresses. So let's just regress him back to 3.3 ERA. Let's regress him from a 38% strikeout to a 33% strikeout.
Still insane.
I know. And let's say he ups the innings to 160. That still looks like a
pretty good
valuable pitcher in that spot. So
would you rather Strider or DeGrom? They're going right next to each other.
I know.
It's the fun question.
I know. I think Strider throws more innings. So
DeGrom
is the best pitcher in baseball on a per innings basis. What do we get from him?
How many innings?
I know.
Yeah.
If we knew we'd be rich. We could win the main.
Such a fun question with them going right next to each other.
Yeah.
Another fun thing, if you're at a bar and you said, "Hey, can you name the guy that won 21 games last year?" I guarantee you Kyle Wright's name would not come up. And that's an impressive thing looking at that stat. The dude was great last year. Kind of once Strider Mania came over, we kind of forgot a little bit about who Kyle Wright was because he took over the first half of the year. Strider took the second half. But still, Wright finished with a 3.19 ERA, 3.3 xFIP, 180 innings, which is outstanding. And he got the 21 dubs because you mentioned good teams win games. Good pitchers win games on good teams. What's your thoughts on Kyle Wright coming into the 2023 at pick like 120-ish?
Yeah, I think he's a decent value there. And I think some people will question whether what he did is sustainable or not. I think it 100% is because right while he was horrific in the majors before this year, I mean, he had several stints. He debuted in 2018 as a 22-year-old, and it took him to 2022 to actually perform. But he was always really good in AAA, complete head case when he got in the majors. But this is something that really changed my analysis a bit. And Ian Kahn talks about it a lot is you can watch pitchers on the mound. And when I watched Kyle Wright in the World Series game in game 4 when in 2021, when he had to come in relief and throw those 4 2/3 innings, he was a different pitcher and it was just a different mentality. And at that point, like I was like, okay, like I think Kyle Wright could really be a guy next year. And we saw that. So is he likely to sustain a 3.19 ERA? Maybe not. But we also look in the fact that was actually kind of inflated because he had a horrific start against Oakland in September where he allowed 8 earned runs. It was a bizarre start out of him at the Coliseum where he just got hit around. He allowed 2 home runs and 8 earned, and that inflated his ERA a bit. And he still finished at a 3.19 for the season. So I think Kyle Wright can be a mid threes ERA. And at pick 120, a mid threes ERA is really solid. He's kind of like Fried, where he's similar strikeouts in that range, like 23%. So I don't know. I'm kind of a fan. What are your thoughts there? Because I'm curious.
I've been very torn on him. It's been hard for me to get in on him. I like him. I like him. I love the talent. I look like who's going around him. It's like, am I taking another hitter there, or do I go like earlier and get a Blake Snell right before him, or do I wait a little longer and take a chance on like a Nick Lodolo, who's Kyle Wright's at least proven it for a full season, so you have to kind of second guess it. It's mainly more of a hitters section of the draft for me, so I've kind of missed out
Yeah.
on Kyle Wright, if that's the way to say it. But maybe I need to reassess maybe because like everything you mentioned makes sense, and I love that comp to Fried. If you think about it in a nutshell, it's like innings, ratios, strikeouts, a lot of similarities, between the two. So why is one going like 60 picks, ahead of him?
Yeah, and it's also worth noting that Wright changed his repertoire completely, where he started throwing the curveball most of any pitch. Like he ditched the four seam like down significantly, and he threw the curveball 35% of the time. And I'm always a proponent of pitchers throwing their best pitch the most often, and that's exactly what we saw out of Wright. Like he was like, "All right, screw the slider; it wasn't good. Let me throw the curveball," and the curveball was really stinking good. Had a 33.5% whiff rate on it. The sinker was a good ground ball pitch to get outs when he needed it to be. And we really saw that tick up too. So all those things just kind of lead me to the fact that there is some sustainability in here. Like I said, maybe not to the full extent that we saw, but even if he's increases from a 3.19 to a 3.5 ERA, like
Still
I'd
not
be okay
bad.
with it. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's go to the elder statesman of this team, and that is Charlie Morton, who is a guy I love to target. Like I've in years past, I haven't gotten there quite yet this year. ADP's 160, a little more expensive than usual for Chucky. But what he does is he throws innings, he gets strikeouts, and the ratio is a roller coaster, right? Sometimes it's great. Last year it was like a hiccup, but the xFIP was 3.6, so maybe he underachieved a bit. But he just gets you innings, he gets you strikeouts, he just fills like that gap in your rotation. But you used to have to pay a price like this for him, which you have to pay now, and he keeps getting older, and you're waiting for the other shoe to drop eventually with Chucky. So, what's your thoughts on Charlie Morton?
This is my probably least favorite signing that they've done. And I understand it because he's a leader and they have a young rotation and he's a mentor to a lot of the pitchers. So I think that definitely factored into this contract. And golly, I don't know. He was so just up and down all last year. I mean, you mentioned he threw innings. That was the positive. He got you strikeouts. I mean, he struck out over 200 batters, which, very few pitchers can say they do. He did it still at 38. The price is what concerns me, though. You mentioned that's a higher price than I want to pay for
Yep.
Charlie Morton. And when does the bottom just fall out? And we're talking about 39-year-old. Very few can sustain an elite level there. I mean, Verlander is a unicorn in that sense, where it comes back from TJ at 39 and is Cy Young.
Yeah, it's real tricky, and that's why I have not pulled the trigger on Charlie yet. And I usually love to. It's just that price is too much. I want to ask you a quick question on Mike Soroka because this is a guy that I didn't even want to draft last year because of injuries, and it made sense when it actually happened. But I almost forgot he was even in the rotation right now. I thought he was still hurt, but he came out in an interview just a day or two ago, like Friday, Saturday, or something, and said this is the first offseason in like 2 or 3 years at least where I'm healthy and actually competing for a job instead of just competing for my like ability to pitch. And which was really interesting for me to hear as a baseball guy because that's a different mindset, as you would know, that someone coming into camp now, not worried about his health. He's like, I'm healthy and I'm competing for a job. Like there's a difference. And we all know how good Mike Soroka was. So I don't know if he can get there this year because he's been kind of off for so long. But what's your thoughts on Soroka, who we at one point were drafting like Max Fried, and now you are literally getting at a tremendous discount. I know I'm not obviously the only one forgot about him. Almost a 400 ADP right now.
Yeah, I mean, talk about all the weird things that happen. I mean, a fluke Achilles tear in a game in 2020. He has the surgery. He tears it again, rehabbing because the surgery wasn't done right. He ends up being allergic to the stitches. The dude just had like such a bad run of luck. And I think he's, like you said, the comment that he made was that, like, it tells me that he's ready to go.
Yep.
He's only 25 years old still. Like, that's
Yep.
weird to think. He debuted at 20. He debuted at 20 years old in 2018 and had a 3.51 ERA. 2019 over the full season, he had 2.68 ERA. I know people don't like Soroka. They didn't like him then because of the K rate. I don't care. There was elite command control. He got a lot of balls on the ground. Like, he just got the job done consistently. And you can live with a lower K rate when you're getting elite ratios. And I think that's what we're going to get from a healthy Mike Soroka. And I think there's a lot to be said about the fact that he was able to have a regular offseason for the first time in 2 years. So he's had no restrictions. He's going to be pitching for a job. It's interesting because him and Ian Anderson are best friends, actually, and they're the ones that are going to be competing for that 5th spot. So it adds another element too, where it's like that friendly competition where it's like, you're going to beat you. And it'll be interesting to see how it shakes out because Anderson's also he's been working in pitch labs this offseason, and we've seen Anderson be good in the past. So that 5th spot will be fun.
Yeah, and Anderson, Ian Anderson. Why do I have way too many Andersons on? Well, oh, that's why. He has an ADP of over 500, so almost 100 picks after Soroka. If you're hitting into like a DC, which one would you take a chance on?
Honestly, I'd like both because I'm just not certain that
Well, Charlie might not pitch a full season or something.
That's kind of my
Yeah,
thought is that
yeah,
if they may go 6-man in some spots just to give Morton more rest.
that makes sense.
And I struggle to say that because and also Strider could use both those guys are ones that would benefit from that just from an inning standpoint. But you're Fried and you're right. You need to throw every 5th day. So it kind of throws a loop into it. But it's a strong possibility they could go with a 6-man for a little bit.
Yeah.
I don't know. I can't say that for certain. It hasn't been discussed, but I mean, I would say Fried and Ryder are the only ones I'm confident that throw 180 plus, and the rest could benefit from a 6-man rotation. So
I like it.
Who knows? I like both, honestly, taking shots on them.
A couple of nice late round DC darts, that's for sure. Let's go to the bullpen here. Raisel Iglesias, when they made the trade last year for him, I said he's the closer in 2023. People are still stressed out about Doug Kimley Jansen signed somewhere. I'm like, they did not trade for him to put him as not the closer. Like, he still had 2 or 3 more years on his deal. Like, it was not happening. Well, he's the closer. He's electric. He was great as a closer, great as a setup man for the Braves. I don't have a lot to say about Raisel except the dude's awesome. Do you have anything else on him? And what else do you think about the bullpen that might have some spec chances for fantasy?
Yeah, the bullpen's got a lot of intriguing pitchers, but I just, like you said, you don't pay someone, or they traded for him, and he has 3 years left on a deal at 16 mil a year. You don't pay a 7th inning guy that.
Yep.
I get that that's what he did last year, but they had Jansen as well.
Yeah,
They knew
had
they
to
weren't
last year.
they weren't re-signing Jansen, and they knew that all offseason. I don't care what they said at the beginning of the offseason, what Anthopoulos said they were going to try to re-sign Jansen. It was Iglesias' job, and that's why they traded for him, and they gave nothing, which is bizarre. It was just a salary dump.
It's angels being angels, baby.
Yeah, but yeah, Iglesias was so good after he came over to Atlanta, and it just seems like it's his role to dominate. He had a 0.34 ERA in Atlanta over 26 innings with 30 Ks. And you heard that right. 0.34 ERA.
Insane. Just insane.
So, I mean, he's the guy. I think that, Kinley had, I think, 38 saves last year, if I'm not mistaken. So those opportunities are there, and he should get 35 plus, I think. AJ Minter's interesting. Minter's really elite, actually, and he just doesn't really get the recognition. So he could get some appearances in the ninth if there's lefties. But for the most part, I am pretty confident that Iglesias just locked into the role.
Yeah. I'd be shocked if he disappears. That's for sure. Let's talk prospects real quick, as you are the Dynasty Dugout master himself. Usually we look for guys that are going to be potentially impactful this year, and we're talking about the Braves, who are super young, so most of the impact might be gone. But there's got to be some, because they don't mind bringing them up from Double A, even, as we can tell. So what are some names we could potentially look for on the radar in Atlanta?
Well, the farm is barren at the upper levels right now, and people kind of want to use that and
It's because
crap
they're
on them a
all in
bit.
the bigs.
Right. So the system looks bad, but think of in a normal scenario, you would have Strider, you'd have Harris and Grissom, all still prospects, and they'd probably all be top 25 prospects. So the system looks completely different if you view it that way. And the fact that they just don't need anybody to come up at any point soon because everybody's locked in for so long. I mean, the line of pitchers that's waiting to get a shot is ridiculous. That's why they felt comfortable trading all those guys to Oakland for Sean Murphy, because they didn't need a Kyle Muller. They didn't need Roy Salinas. They didn't need these guys anytime soon. So it just made sense to do. But Jared Schuster is the closest one. He's a former first-round pick in 2020 out of Wake Forest, a lefty. Last year threw 140 innings between Double and Triple A, where he had a 3.29 ERA, 104 WHIP, and 145 Ks. Schuster's a solid command guy. Features a fastball, not great. I mean, the fastball is really the issue, and that I'm afraid will hurt him in the majors, because it's just low 90s. Not too great of a pitch. And it's interesting because before the COVID shutdown in 2020, when the Braves drafted him, he was like sitting 95 consistently at Wake, but then he's dipped back down to averaging 92 last season. But he does have a slider that's elite, a lot of swing and misses. His changeup is by far his best pitch. So the 3-pitch mix will be pretty good, I think. Gets plenty of whiffs. He'll be a serviceable major league starter. High floor. I don't expect him to ever be an ace, but you never know, because the Braves are just developing wizards.
Just keep
so
doing it. Yeah.
yeah,
It's unbelievable. And they'll probably sign him for a 7-year, like $34 million deal or something, because it's what they do. And it's just, I'm not even making fun of them, because I'm just jealous. Like, it's absolutely impressive. I don't know what potion they drink before they enter the room. It's good, because maybe these guys are all buying in on the team concept. It's like, hey, we're going to get paid and survive just fine. Let's make it work. I don't know, but that's a whole other probably podcast for another day. But any final thoughts on the Braves? This was a great podcast, because, like I said before the show with you, and then on the intro, this team is loaded for fantasy. Like, there's literally, we talk about so many teams, and it's like, 5 or 6 of this and a couple of this. Literally everybody in the starting lineup is pretty much going to get rostered, and 4, if not all 5 starting pitchers are in play for the Braves. Like, and obviously their closer is one of the elite closers. Like I said, there was 5 guys in the top 55. Like, that's insane. So what's your thoughts on the Braves?
well, I mean, I never try to bring bias into it for fantasy, but it's certainly a talented team. It's a young team that should be a contender again. And I don't see, I know the Mets got better, the Phillies got better, but I don't really see much of a step back from a team that won 101 games last year. And obviously the Mets did too. So it's going to be a knockdown, drag out fight for the division. It'd be fun, top 3 for sure. But Atlanta has all the pieces to contend. With a healthy Acuña season could be the difference. Healthy Acuña, healthy Albies, like that lineup could do things that we haven't seen before. So that's, like you said, for fantasy purposes, all these guys are useful in some way or another. And even their worst lineup pieces like Rosario and Ozuna are useful in deeper leagues, because they're going to play and they're going to be in a good lineup that could produce. So
yeah, and if they all of a sudden hit a hot streak somewhere here or there, like, that in line can be just huge for those guys. And it's gonna be fun. It's gonna be a fun year with the Atlanta Braves. But what else is a fun year is the stuff that Mr. Chris Clegg is pumping out there. So before we head out, remind everybody about your Substack and what else they can find you doing these days, and on Twitter, all the good stuff.
Sure. Yep. So Twitter, everything pretty much goes there at Roto Clegg, Clegg. Find me there. My Substack is dynastydugout.substack.com. We're doing stuff for Pitcher List this month. We've been pumping out a team top 15 every single day. So we've had different writers doing those. I think I'll end up with doing about 10 or 12 of the 30s, which has been good and fun. A lot of work to write up 15 players in each system. And you might say, oh, it's just 15. But when you're
it's
deep diving,
strenuous.
deep diving each prospect, like I've got one that's coming out on Monday for the Pirates and then again on Tuesday for the Padres. So it's fun. It's taxing, but it's good research. Like as I do it, I'm like, oh man, I was too low on this guy. I was too high on this guy. And it's like, I constantly adjust my rankings. I'm never content, which I guess can be a bad thing in some ways, but a good thing also. So yeah, doing some work at Fantasy Pros too, some articles here and there. But yeah, most of the stuff's at Pitcher List on my Substack.
Awesome. Yeah, everybody make sure you check it out. One of the good guys on the fantasy radar, not on the radar anymore. He is on the fantasy map these days and much, much more. So check him out on the Twitter at Roto Clegg, and don't go near him on a golf course because he'll smoke you. But we will catch up with him some other time. Chris, thanks for joining me, my friend. I appreciate it.
Yep. Thanks so much. Always a pleasure, Bubba.
Everybody, this was Bench with Bubba, your Atlanta Braves season preview with one Chris Clegg. Catch you guys next time.